When her husband died, he left her drowning in crippling debt and saddled with a rotting, decrepit windmill. The entire town laughed, but when the grieving widow struck a hollow floorboard beneath the heavy grinding stones, the laughter abruptly died. What she unearthed didn't just change her life. It destroyed the town's most powerful families. The rain in Oakhaven fell in heavy, unforgiving sheets on the day they buried Arthur Gallagher. Beatrice stood beneath a black umbrella, staring at the freshly turned earth, her heart a hollow cavern of grief and confusion. Arthur had been a good man, a loving husband for 32 years, but in his final days, his mind had seemed to wander into a labyrinth of paranoia and obsession. He had spent their retirement savings, taken out secret loans, and spent countless nights out in the freezing damp. When his heart finally gave out, Beatrice was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. 2 days after the funeral, she sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Philip Abernathy, the town's only estate lawyer. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with agonizing slowness as Philip pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose, looking everywhere but at the widow sitting across from him. "Beatrice, I am incredibly sorry," Philip began, his voice barely rising above a whisper. He shuffled to the thick stack of papers on his desk. "Arthur's debts are substantial. Between the second mortgage on the house and the personal loans he took out over the last 3 years, the bank is going to foreclose on your home by the end of the month." Beatrice's breath hitched. She clutched her worn leather purse to her chest. "But what about his life insurance? What about the savings from the hardware store?" "Drained," Philip said grimly. "All of it. Every last penny was funneled into a single purchase." He slid a yellowed, heavy parchment across the desk. "He bought the old Oakhaven Mill property on the edge of town. That is your sole inheritance, Beatrice. The windmill and the 2 acres of barren rock it sits upon." Beatrice stared at the deed in disbelief. The Oakhaven Mill hadn't been operational since the late 1800s. It was a crumbling, dilapidated eyesore, a wooden tower of rotting timber, broken sails, and collapsed masonry. The town council had been trying to condemn it for a decade. Her husband had traded their future, their security, for a useless pile of garbage. As she stepped out of the law office and onto the wet pavement, a sleek silver town car pulled up to the curb. The rear window rolled down to reveal the smug, deeply lined face of Mayor Thomas Higgins. The Higgins family had run Oakhaven for 4 generations, owning the banks, the real estate, and most of the local businesses. "My deepest condolences, Beatrice," Mayor Higgins purred, though his eyes were cold and calculating. "I heard about Arthur's eccentric financial decisions. Such a tragedy. A man losing his faculties in his twilight years." "What do you want, Thomas?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and rising anger. "I want to help," Higgins replied smoothly. "That old windmill is a hazard. You have mounting debts. I am willing to purchase the mill property from you right now, today, for $5,000. It's more than fair for a condemned plot of land. It will give you enough to move into a modest apartment in the city. $5,000. It was a fraction of what Arthur must have paid for it, a fraction of her debt. But the sheer predatory speed of Higgins's offer set off a faint, warning bell in Beatrice's mind. Why was the mayor so eager to buy a worthless piece of land the day after she inherited it? "I need time to think," Beatrice said stiffly, turning her back on the idling car and walking away as the mayor's face darkened with impatience. That afternoon, Beatrice drove her rusty sedan to the edge of town. The windmill loomed against the grey sky like a skeletal giant, its wooden blades snapped and hanging by rusted iron bolts. The wind howled through the cracked boards, making the entire structure groan in protest. She unlocked the heavy oak door with the rusted iron key Philip had given her, pushing it open with her shoulder. The interior smelled of wet decay, rat droppings and ancient flour dust. Massive wooden gears hung overhead, suspended in a tangle of cobwebs. Beatrice walked toward the center of the room, her boots crunching on debris, and stared at the massive circular grinding stone on the floor. "Why, Arthur?" she whispered into the empty, drafty space, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Why did you do this to us? Why did you leave me with nothing?" Her sorrow boiled over into sudden, violent rage. She picked up a heavy, rusted iron wrench that lay discarded on a wooden workbench and hurled it with all her might at the massive grinding stone. The wrench missed the stone, striking the wooden floorboards right at its base. Thunk! The sound was completely wrong. It wasn't the dull thud of solid timber over dirt. It was a deep, resonating echo. Hollow. Beatrice froze. She wiped her tears, her heart suddenly pounding in her ears. She walked over to where the wrench had fallen. Kneeling on the dirty floor, she ran her hands over the thick oak planks. One of them felt loose. She jammed her fingers into the crack, ignoring the splinters piercing her skin, and pulled. The board came up with a squeal of rusted nails. Beneath it was not dirt, but a polished slab of black slate, and in the center of that slate was an intricate circular depression made of solid brass, etched with peculiar, interlocking geometric symbols. In the very center was a deep, hexagonal keyhole. Arthur hadn't bought a windmill. He had bought whatever was hidden beneath it. And as Beatrice stared at the strange, complex locking mechanism, she realized her husband hadn't lost his mind at all. Beatrice knew she couldn't open the brass mechanism alone. She also knew that she couldn't trust the local police, who were firmly in Mayor Higgins's deep pockets. There was only one person in Oakhaven she could turn to, Tobias Finch. Tobias was a retired, reclusive mechanical engineer who lived in a cluttered barn on the outskirts of town. More importantly, Arthur had once saved Tobias from bankruptcy decades ago, a debt the gruff old man had never forgotten. When Beatrice arrived at Tobias's barn under the cover of darkness, she showed him a charcoal rubbing she had taken of the brass plate. Tobias, a stout man with a thick grey beard and grease-stained hands, stared at the paper under the harsh glare of a work lamp. "This is a combination lock," Tobias muttered, tracing the interlocking circles. 18th century tumbler design, likely French. Very rare, incredibly complex. If you try to force it, internal glass vials of acid will shatter and melt the tumblers, sealing it forever. "Do you have the key?" "I don't have anything," Beatrice said desperately. "Arthur didn't leave a key." Tobias fell silent, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. He walked over to a metal filing cabinet and pulled out a worn cigar box. "Your husband came to see me 2 weeks before he died. He was acting strange, looking over his shoulder. He handed me this and told me to keep it safe. Said if anything happened to him, I was to wait until you came asking." Tobias opened the box. Resting on a bed of velvet was a heavy hexagonal cylinder made of forged steel, covered in sliding, rotating rings with numbers etched into them. It was a cryptex key. An hour later, the two of them were creeping through the tall, wet grass surrounding the Oakhaven mill. The storm had worsened, the thunder masking the sound of their footsteps. As they approached the structure, Tobias grabbed Beatrice's arm and yanked her down into the brush. 2 black SUVs were parked on the dirt road opposite the mill. 3 men in dark raincoats were sweeping the perimeter with heavy flashlights. "Higgins's private security," Tobias whispered. "They're watching the property. We have to go through the old drainage culvert in the back." Mud-soaked and shivering, They managed to slip inside the mill through a rotted loading hatch just as a flashlight beam swept over the wood. Once inside, they knelt by the exposed black slate floor. Tobias handed Beatrice the steel key. "Arthur left this with me for you," Tobias whispered. "You should be the one to open it." Beatrice took the heavy key. She looked at the rotating numbers. What would Arthur have chosen? What was the one thing he would trust her, and only her, to know? She thought of their wedding day, her birthday, his birthday. No, Arthur was too clever for that. She thought of the day they had met. May 14th, 1982. She spun the dials. 051482. She slotted the hexagonal key into the brass depression. It fit perfectly. With a deep breath, Beatrice turned it clockwise. The floor beneath them violently shuddered. A deafening grinding of ancient gears echoed through the mill, masking the sound of the thunder outside. Slowly, the massive 3-ton circular grinding stone in the center of the room began to slide along a hidden iron track, groaning as century-old mechanisms roared to life. Beneath the stone, a dark, gaping square hole was revealed, leading to a narrow, spiraling staircase carved directly into the bedrock. A rush of stale, cold air blew up from the depths, carrying the faint metallic scent of oxidized iron and old paper. Tobias clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight, the beam piercing the absolute darkness. "Well, Beatrice," he breathed, "shall we see what Arthur brought you?" They descended. The stairs went down for at least 40 feet, the air growing colder and denser with every step. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a massive, reinforced subterranean antechamber. The walls were lined with brick, supported by thick oak beams. In the center of the room sat a massive wooden desk covered in dust. Surrounding it were dozens of iron filing cabinets and wooden chests. But it wasn't gold or jewels that filled the room. Beatrice walked over to the desk, wiping away a thick layer of dust from a leather-bound ledger. She opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous, handwritten records dating back to 1892. She flipped to the next book, and the next. "Tobias!" Beatrice gasped, her hands shaking as she read the copperplate handwriting. "These aren't just ledgers. These are property deeds, embezzlement records, confessions." Tobias leaned over her shoulder, reading aloud. "Record of transfer, Blackwood Valley Estate. Seized by Mayor Elias Higgins. Rightful owners executed for treason. Properties liquidated." He looked at Beatrice, his eyes wide with shock. "Beatrice, the Higgins family didn't build this town. They stole it. They murdered the original landowners, forged the deeds and hoarded the wealth. Every business, every farm, every house in Oakhaven. The Higgins family stole it all, and these books are the proof." Arthur hadn't lost his mind. He had been conducting an investigation. He had discovered the town's darkest secret, a century-long conspiracy of blood and theft that the Higgins dynasty had buried beneath the old mill. He spent their money to buy the land, so Higgins couldn't destroy the evidence. "There's something else," Tobias said, his flashlight beam panning across the room to the far wall. Set into the brickwork was a massive steel vault door, the kind used in early 20th century banks. The wheel had already been turned, the thick locking bolts retracted. Arthur had managed to open it before he died. Beatrice stepped forward, pushing the heavy steel door. It creaked on its hinges, swinging open to reveal the inner sanctum. Tobias directed his light inside, and both of them stopped dead in their tracks. The beam caught the unmistakable, blinding reflection of thousands of stacked, gleaming bars piled high against the stone walls. The stolen wealth of 100 families, hidden in the dark for a century, waiting for the light. The glow of the flashlight bounced off the towering stacks of gold, casting long, distorted shadows against the damp brick walls. Beatrice stood completely paralyzed, the breath caught in her throat. The sheer volume of wealth hidden beneath the crumbling windmill was incomprehensible. There were hundreds of bars, neatly stacked on rotting wooden pallets, alongside velvet bags, spilling over with antique pocket watches, diamond brooches, and silver heirlooms. These were not the spoils of a nameless bank heist. They were the stolen legacies of Oakhaven's founding families. Tobias stepped cautiously into the vault, his heavy boots echoing in the silent, subterranean chamber. He reached out with a trembling, grease-stained hand and picked up a heavy gold ingot. He turned it over under the beam of his light. "Look at the stamp," Tobias whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "This isn't federal bullion. It's been smelted down from personal items, but the stamps mark the original owners. Here, the crest of the Gallagher family. Your husband's ancestors, Beatrice. And this one, the crest of the Sullivan family. The Higgins dynasty didn't just steal the land. They melted down the history of this entire county to line their own pockets." Beatrice walked toward the back of the vault, her eyes drawn to a solitary wooden pedestal. Resting on top of it was a leather-bound journal, much newer than the century-old ledgers outside, and a folded piece of parchment sealed with red wax. She recognized the sloppy, hurried handwriting on the front of the parchment instantly. "To my beloved Beatrice." With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. Tobias stepped closer, angling the flashlight so she could read the ink that Arthur had penned in his final, desperate days. "My dearest Beatrice," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then my heart has finally failed me. But you must know the truth. It was not nature that took my life. Thomas Higgins discovered that I had bought the Oakhaven mill. He knew I was close to unearthing the vault. For weeks, I have suffered from dizzy spells, palpitations, and shortness of breath. I found the culprit too late. Higgins's men have been slipping a concentrated digitalis compound into my thermos at the diner. I am being poisoned, slowly and deliberately, made to look like a man dying of natural causes." A sob tore through Beatrice's chest, echoing sharply off the gold-lined walls. She clamped a hand over her mouth, the paper shaking violently in her grip. "I spent everything we had to secure this property," the letter continued. "I knew they would try to steal our home, but they cannot legally seize the mill as long as my name, and now yours, is on the deed. Inside the ledgers on the desk, you will find the exact records of how Elias Higgins murdered Oakhaven's original settlers, including my own great-grandfather, framing them for treason to confiscate their land. The gold in this room belongs to the people of this town. Take the ledgers. Expose them. Avenge us, my love." "He was murdered," Beatrice choked out, the reality of the words sinking into her bones. The grief that had weighed her down for weeks suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. A burning, blinding fury ignited in her chest. Thomas Higgins had smiled at her. He had offered her $5,000 while standing on the grave of the man he had assassinated. Before Tobias could offer a word of comfort, a heavy, reverberating thud echoed from the ceiling above them. Dust and loose mortar rained down from the brick archways. Tobias instantly switched off the flashlight, plunging the vault into absolute darkness. "They're inside," he hissed, grabbing Beatrice's arm. Higgins's security team. They must have noticed the ground shaking when the vault mechanism engaged. Above them, the muffled sounds of heavy boots stomping across the wooden floorboards of the windmill grew louder. A muffled shout echoed down the hidden stairwell. "Boss, the grinding stone has been moved. There's a staircase down here." "We have to get out of here," Beatrice whispered in the dark, panic rising in her throat. "If they find us down here with the gold and the ledgers, they will bury us in this room. We'll just be 2 more bodies added to the Higgins family secret." "We can't go up," Tobias said, his mind racing. He flicked the flashlight back on, aiming it at the floor. "But we might not have to. These old Prohibition-era vaults and smuggler dens always had a secondary egress, a way to move the goods out if the feds raided the front." Tobias rushed to the back corner of the vault, sweeping his light over the brickwork. He began pressing against the stones, searching for a release mechanism. Above them, the sound of boots began descending the spiral stone staircase. They had less than a minute. "Beatrice, grab the ledgers," Tobias ordered. "Only the ledgers from the desk and Arthur's letter. Leave the gold. The gold won't put Higgins in prison, but the paperwork will." Beatrice sprinted out of the vault and grabbed a heavy canvas sack Arthur had left near the desk. She hastily shoved the 3 most critical ledgers and Arthur's letter inside, slinging the heavy strap over her shoulder. "Found it," Tobias grunted. He leaned his entire body weight against a section of the back wall. With a harsh scrape of stone against stone, a narrow, dark tunnel was revealed, smelling strongly of river water and wet earth. "Hey, stop right there," a gruff voice echoed from the bottom of the stairs. The beam of a tactical flashlight swept across the subterranean antechamber, illuminating the open vault door. 3 men in black tactical gear, led by a ruthless enforcer named Gregory Langdon, stood at the entrance, drawing their weapons. "Go!" Tobias shoved Beatrice into the narrow tunnel. He grabbed a heavy iron crowbar from the floor and jammed it into the track of the vault door, before violently spinning the locking wheel on the tunnel's hidden entrance. The stone door slammed shut just as a bullet ricocheted off the brick wall where Beatrice had been standing a second before. They were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, the sound of the mercenaries hammering against the stone wall muffled behind them. Tobias turned on his light, revealing a tight, descending earthen tunnel braced by rotting wooden beams. "Keep moving," Tobias breathed, coughing on the damp air. "This should let out near the Oakhaven River. If we make it to my truck, we drive straight to the state capital. We can't trust anyone within 50 miles of this town." Together, the widow and the engineer plunged deeper into the dark, carrying the explosive truth that would soon burn the Higgins empire to the ground. The rain had turned the banks of the Oakhaven River into a treacherous, muddy swamp by the time Beatrice and Tobias emerged from the iron grate of the drainage pipe. Covered in mud, gasping for air, and shivering from the freezing downpour, they scrambled up the riverbank. The canvas bag slung over Beatrice's shoulder felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but she gripped the strap with white-knuckled determination. In the distance, the skeletal silhouette of the windmill was illuminated by the sweeping beams of heavy searchlights. Higgins's men were tearing the place apart, realizing too late that the intruders had escaped with the only thing more valuable than the gold: the evidence. "My truck is parked 3 miles south, hidden behind the old lumber yard," Tobias panted, wiping mud from his face. "We stick to the tree line. We don't stop for anything." The 3-mile trek through the storm was a grueling test of endurance. Beatrice's muscles screamed in protest, and her lungs burned with every breath, but the memory of Arthur's letter pushed her forward. Every time she felt like collapsing, she pictured the arrogant, predatory smile of Mayor Thomas Higgins. When they finally reached Tobias's rusted pickup truck, they threw themselves into the cab. Tobias hot-wired the ignition. He had long ago disabled the standard key start to prevent theft, and the engine roared to life. They tore down the back roads, avoiding the main highways, driving through the night until the sun began to rise over the gleaming skyscrapers of the state capital. At 8 a.m., a muddy, exhausted Beatrice marched through the pristine marble lobby of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's regional headquarters. When the young receptionist tried to dismiss her, Beatrice slammed the century-old ledger onto the desk, followed by Arthur's letter. "My name is Beatrice Gallagher," she said, her voice echoing with commanding authority. "I have documentary evidence of a century-long, multi-generational racketeering and embezzlement conspiracy involving the mayor of Oakhaven. I also have written evidence of the premeditated murder of my husband. I am not leaving until I speak to a federal prosecutor." Within the hour, Beatrice and Tobias were sitting in a secure conference room with William Danforth, a seasoned federal prosecutor known for his relentless pursuit of corrupt public officials. Danforth adjusted his glasses, his expression growing darker and more stunned as he carefully turned the brittle pages of the ledgers. He read Arthur's final letter in complete silence. "These ledgers," Danforth finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "They meticulously document the forging of property deeds, the liquidations of assets, and the unlawful execution of landowners. The gold you described, it's still down there. Unless Higgins managed to move 3 tons of bullion in the middle of a thunderstorm," Tobias grunted, "which I highly doubt." Danforth picked up the desk phone. "Get me the tactical field office. We need a strike team in Oakhaven immediately. Coordinate with the state police, but freeze the local precinct out. Nobody in that town gets a warning." Back in Oakhaven, Mayor Thomas Higgins was standing in his sprawling, luxurious office overlooking the town square. He was screaming into his cell phone, his face purple with rage. Gregory Langdon was on the other end, explaining that the vault had been breached and the ledgers were missing. Higgins knew exactly what that meant. His great-grandfather's meticulous arrogance, documenting every stolen dime and forged deed, was about to destroy them. "Get my private plane ready at the airstrip," Higgins barked, violently sweeping a stack of papers off his mahogany desk. "Wire the offshore accounts. I need to be in the air in 20 minutes. But Thomas Higgins never made it to the airstrip. As he burst through the front doors of the municipal building, flanked by his private security, the town square was suddenly swarmed by a dozen black federal SUVs. Sirens wailed, shattering the morning peace of Oakhaven. Armed FBI agents poured out of the vehicles, their tactical rifles raised. "Thomas Higgins!" a federal agent shouted through a bullhorn. "You are under arrest for racketeering, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder. Keep your hands where we can see them." Higgins froze, his face draining of all color. The townspeople of Oakhaven, on their way to work or the local bakery, stopped in their tracks, watching in stunned silence as the untouchable, omnipotent mayor was shoved against the hood of an SUV, handcuffed, and read his rights. The ensuing investigation tore the town apart, only to stitch it back together. The FBI secured the subterranean vault beneath the Windmill, recovering the massive hoard of stolen gold and heirlooms. The ledgers proved to be the ultimate weapon. Federal courts used the meticulous records to dismantle the Higgins empire entirely. Every piece of property, every business, and every tract of land that had been stolen over the past century was seized by the federal government and entered into a massive restitution fund for the descendants of the original victims. Thomas Higgins was indicted on 74 counts, including the murder of Arthur Gallagher. Facing life in federal prison, the arrogant mayor finally broke, weeping as the judge handed down his sentence. Beatrice Gallagher's life was transformed overnight, because the windmill and the land belonged to her, and she had willingly surrendered the stolen goods to the authorities. The federal government awarded her a staggering 10% finder's fee of the recovered bullion, amounting to over $4 million. Furthermore, the court officially returned the massive Blackwood-adjacent estate to her name, the land that had been stolen from Arthur's ancestors. She paid off her debts instantly. But she didn't leave Oakhaven. Instead, she used her newfound wealth to rebuild the town. She funded a new public library, fired the corrupt police force, and ensured that the businesses Higgins had strangled were given zero-interest loans to thrive again. And at the edge of town, the old Oakhaven mill did not fall into ruin. Beatrice hired Tobias Finch to completely restore it. The rotting timber was replaced with rich, varnished oak. The broken sails were rebuilt, catching the wind once again to turn the massive, grinding stones. It was no longer a symbol of decay, but a monument to the truth, standing tall over the town that Arthur Gallagher had given his life to save. The chilling secrets hidden beneath the Oakhaven mill shattered a century of corruption, proving Arthur wasn't a madman, but a brilliant hero who sacrificed everything to bring justice to a stolen town. What would you have done if you found that vault? If you were captivated by this incredible, true-to-life tale of betrayal, hidden history, and shocking redemption, please hit the like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling mysteries. Don't miss our next video.